Principles of Mobility. That's the webinar that I hosted last night live. However, it did not record. I cannot access it for some reason. So I will record it again this way. So those of you that didn't catch it live can watch it. Hopefully I will be able to make it a little bit more condensed as well, partly because I already did it and partly because the live format compared to this. So still though, it is uncensored and unscripted. I have no notes. I want to approach it from my own knowledge and my own experience, and just share my views on the topic in general. So to what I want to get into is definitions on mobility, definitions, flexibility, mobility, endurance, strength, all the labels that we like to use in, and how they differ, what the general consensus of what they mean are, and what I believe are the implications of these labels, and how I think we should better go about it. I then like to discuss what gaining range, what allows a certain body part to express range and what limits that. And that relates to pain and how we perceive a threat in our bodies. And it relates to, let's get into that right now. So first of all, a very fundamental aspect of the body and the body's capacity that we should put more emphasis on is the very basic understanding that when one muscle lengthens, so in this example my bicep lengthens, it gets longer, the tricep contracts, gets shorter. One side gets longer, that means the other has to get shorter. One is contracting, one is expanding. This is the relationship between every single body part. If something is contracting, the antagonist, the muscle on the opposing side, contracts, and vice versa. This is always the case. This is fundamental information, because what is stretching, what is mobility, what is flexibility, we'll get into all the labeling and the definitions, but that is how they are all related to range of motion. How far can I go? Basically the lengthening. So how long can my tricep go? And if I feel stiff, I cannot lengthen it. That is wanting to make it longer. However, what is missed many times, I find, in specific approaches to mobility, flexibility, yada yada, is we don't focus on the shortening side. We don't focus on the side that needs to contract to allow that the antagonist, the opposite side, to lengthen. So let's illustrate that in an example. You are trying to reach your toes. That is a hamstring stretch mostly, and most people are limited, or who are limited, think that their hamstrings are stiff. They are too short and it needs to lengthen. And although that is true to some extent, we should look at the relationship between the hamstring and the opposing muscle, which in that case is the hip flexor and quads. To be able to lengthen my hamstring, to make it longer, to reach further forward, I need to be able to contract to shorten my hip flexor. If I'm unable to do that, my hamstring is unable to lengthen. It's a direct relationship between those. So if we instead put our emphasis and our attention to how can I make my hip flexor stronger, how can I make it contract better, now I'm allowing my hamstring to lengthen. In my experience, this is usually more worth prioritizing on. For most people, it is not a matter of their hamstring or any muscle being too short and in need of lengthening. It's a matter of not the body not being able to express the mobility, the range, the length it already has, because the opposing side is just not being able to activate and engage shortening. I hope that makes sense. And that relates to my central overall view on mobility, and that is to regard it as the body's capacity as a whole, and that goes for everything. I think why people are attracted to mobility as the definition rather than flexibility, and you often hear that flexibility is just passive range. It's how far can my joint move in any way, including I'm putting it there forcefully or someone else is pulling it there. How far can it go under any means? Whereas the general definition on mobility is how far can I control it and take it there myself, and that is more practical to most, and I think that's what's more attractive about it. So why is that? Why is it more attractive and more commonly used as a definition? I think that is simply because it expresses capacity better. It's more, it shows that I have a capacity in my body. I have a capability of doing something myself, rather than it just demonstrating something passively. And that's a good thing, and perhaps that makes it a better definition and a better concept to use. However, I think the most important takeaway there is to recognize that we are looking at capacities in our bodies, and that is all it ever is. It's after the fact, after that, we choose to label it as mobility or strength or flexibility or acceleration or whatever label, whatever capacity. So I think we should simplify things and not get too obsessed about the specific labels and approaches and all of this, but remember that it is the question to ask, the central question is, what is my body incapable of doing that I would like it to become capable of? And how do I go about that? And that is the same for if it falls under someone's definition of strength or mobility or flexibility. Doesn't really matter, it's about capacity. So that is not to say that it's not good to use labels, and some might serve us better than others. However, it is fundamentally just about that. And I think taking that approach would simplify things tremendously and would mean less misconceptions about mobility. Let's refer to it as mobility for now, as to make things a bit easier. I think it's one of the most misunderstood things, really. Some people just look at someone flexible and they're just flexible, and they can assume that it's just genetic or it's something you just are or you aren't, and they just try something and they come to the conclusion like, oh, I'm not one of them, I'm not flexible, the end. So it becomes this weird either or, either you have it or you don't. And I think what mobility, the definition there, again, because it includes some form of capacity in your body, that helped a little bit to get us to understand that no, it's about building a capacity in the body, just like everything else. You are incapable of something, you find a way to make yourself more capable in that sense. That mobility helped us to do that, so now it's a little bit more accepted or understood that it is something you can actually work on. You can become more capable of being mobile. But I think the next step, and to really get this across for people, to not have these misconceptions of what it is to not label it, to not put it so strictly under a certain category, but just regard everything we do with our bodies as a capacity. So if I want to increase my capacity to deadlift, I specifically target that lift and overload it and increase over time. Exactly the same principles apply if I want to increase a mobility position. I just have to remember a little bit more about what I started off saying about the antagonist, the relationship between what shortens and what lengthens. So it's fundamentally the same principle in that I want to increase my body's capacity. Then the approach might be different. And that is also something I want to cover at the end. How do we go about that specifically if we come to the understanding, the observation that, okay, I'm incapable of this range of motion. I want to increase my body's ability to go there, to go a bit further in a certain position. How do I go about that? So point being, that is where we start from. That is the baseline, looking at it as capacity in general, because now the next step becomes logical, and it is a step one. Now we can go to step two. most people skip that first step, and that leads, I think, to this misconception of not really knowing what it is and not knowing what the benefit to me could be to improve this capacity. Same thing goes in a performance setting, right? A lot of athletes or people in a certain sport have these misconceptions around flexibility, mobility, and so on, that they don't think it would benefit them, that it's just not necessary because it's just stretching, it's just this specific thing. So zooming out and regarding it more as no, but you are looking to improve your performance, right? That is fundamentally increasing your body's capacity, and it might be in something very specific, but case is still whether that is the technique of the specific thing, the strength in your body to execute the specific thing, or the mobility in your body to execute the specific thing. It is all the body's capacity. So that is the point I try to get across to people in general, and especially if they're in a sport of some kind or a performance, something they want to perform better in, to just make them understand. For example, one example I used a lot with CrossFitters to illustrate this example is that, let's say you're doing a snatch or something with an overhead squat of some kind. That is a tricky situation for your body to go in because it requires range in basically all your joints. And most people are very limited there. So to illustrate that example and make it clear for them, I say, since you are fighting your own body to just get in the position, maybe that takes 30% effort. So you're only able to access 70% of your energy to lift the weight that you're looking to lift. 30% is to fight your own body to get in the position. So it's a massive bottleneck. Wouldn't it then make sense to improve your body's capacity to be in that position so you can apply as close to 100% as possible to just lifting the weight, right? And you can apply exactly the same logic to just throwing a punch. For example, obviously it doesn't require a lot of mobility, but it's fundamentally the same principle of improving your body's capacity so it feels a little bit more safe. So instead of it protecting itself a little bit, it can apply all of its effort to the thing that you want to do. And that gets me into the part of pain and perceived threat, because that is a definition of mobility that I would be pretty fine with. Something along the lines of making your body feel safe, feel comfortable in a certain position. Why can't I just drop in a side split right now? It is because my body does not feel comfortable. It does not feel safe to allow me to do that. It is not necessarily, and most likely not, that my muscles aren't long enough to get to that position. It is that my body perceives it as a threat. And that is mostly a good thing. That is an important function of our body and nervous system to protect ourselves like this. So what mobility training is fundamentally talking to your body, letting it know that it's safe and can let go a little bit, and doing that progressively. So it is exposing yourself to it a little bit, but not so much that it freaks out and panics, like if I just try to jump in a side split. But I'm letting it know, like, okay, I realize you're freaking out here, but I expose you to it a little bit, and then you adapt, and we can go a little bit deeper next time. That is how it goes. And that is, again, about capacity. That is building a capacity in our bodies. And that comes back to the shortening, lengthening side. If we strengthen the muscle that shortens when something else needs to lengthen, we are doing exactly this. We are making the body feel more comfortable there. Fundamentally, why our bodies are not comfortable to enter something is because it's not strong enough in that very specific position, right? It's too weak, so it protects itself. So building the strength, and that this is what end range strength, that definition, talks about and has a good argument for, and I think it makes a lot of sense as a concept, as a definition. But again, that goes back to the definitions. I think we have a visitor here. It is a big dog. So our body perceives something as a threat that makes us shut down and protect ourselves. So our job, and when you structure mobility training, is to choose things that makes our body feel safer. And I like to look at that as the same way as strength training, and that is because that is how you improve your body's capacity to do something. It's just a matter of, okay, I can only go here with my shoulder. Why can't I go further? It's because my body doesn't feel it's safe to go further, protect itself. So if I spend time in this position, pushing it a little bit and gaining strength here, that means my body is like, okay, now I feel safer, and you can go a little bit further. That's how I like to look at things. And that is very largely to do with the shortening side. It's about that being able to contract so the other side feels safe to lengthen. Hope I'm drilling this point home. So to make it a little bit more practical, I'd like to some method how you can structure this in your own training, how you can apply this knowledge to create a mobility session of some kind to improve range capacity. One way can be to simply pick one drill that is focusing on the shortening side, immediately followed by something that focusing on the lengthening side. Few examples of that can be a seated leg lift, meaning you're sitting on the floor like a hamstring stretch and you're lifting your legs, your feet off the floor. That is a hip flexor shortening drill. It forces you to engage your hip flexor, shortening that. And that in turn allows the opposing side, the hamstring, to lengthen, to make it feel safer to extend. So you can do that first, and immediately without rest or with very little rest, follow that by a hamstring stretch of some kind, which might just be sit in the same position but start reaching forward. What I found that also help with is to understand that when you then stretch and do the lengthening part, you still have very fresh in your mind how it feels to contract the hip flexor. And learning this is exactly what we're going for here, to get our body to understand that. So in whatever position, when we want something to lengthen, we have the skill and the ability, the capacity to shorten so that we can go further. So that's one nice way of doing it, just simply supersetting them, shortening to lengthening. Another way of doing it is starting the sessions with a lot of shortening drills. So let's say you want to do a hip-focused mobility session, then I would look at a shortening drill for the hip flexor, a shortening drill for the hamstring, and a shortening drill for the glutes. And that will depend a little bit about specifically what type of stretches you're looking for, if it's internal rotation, external rotation, hip flexion, hip extension, and so on. But principle being, you shorten first, you really contract. The more cramps, the better. And then you can go into more stretches for that, because now you have just reminded your body what you need to activate, what you need to contract and shorten, to then go into the stretches and allow it to lengthen. And you will also develop the strength and the ability to just contract more over time. And I would do that first, regardless of what you're stretching and your level. Like, start with some shortening, followed by lengthening, either supersetting it or one after the other. And then, and only then, would I go into stuff like splits or bridges, things that involve a lot of muscles at once. And the reasoning there is simply to kind of get rid of the stiff links, make sure everything is active, so that when you go into the actual split or bridge, for example, you are less limited by your most limiting factor. If you have very stiff shoulders and you go straight to the bridge, you will just be very limited by the shoulders, and you won't really get to get the most benefit out of the entire bridge. So addressing the bottlenecks first by shortening, some lengthening drills specifically for the shoulders, then move on to the big thing. That's how I like to structure mobility sessions. I think that is enough for now. And as I said during the live webinar, I would love, once you've watched this, to gather some questions and send them over and responding to the email. and I would like to do another webinar, most likely live, answering those questions, so getting a little bit more interactive with it. And furthermore, I would like to mention my service FtFEducation, that is very much like this. It's a lecture in a similar format as this, on a new topic every single week over 12 weeks, and I send that out to the group of people in the service. And then a few days later, when everyone's got time to watch this lecture, we have a group call and we discuss the topic at hand as a group, just sharing and exchanging perspectives on it. And the current group, it's going tremendously well. So I'm gonna double down on it, and I'm already gonna start another round of it in 2 weeks, the 21st. So if you watched it and you enjoyed me and this type of topics, and you want to learn more in general, you're just curious about topics like this, and to find like-minded individual to discuss it with, this service is something I promise you will love. And that is only half of the service. The other half is the physical practice, where we assess you and discuss in great detail what your goals are, what your lifestyle is, what every detail about yourself, and I make an individual program based on that for you specifically. However, still in working in synergy with the other people in the group, so that we can continuously daily share videos of our practice as questions. I will be the coach, helping out, but the other participants would also be exchanging. So it's basically just continuous exchange and conversation around training, specific physical practice, as well as educational material for content like this and topics like this. Yeah, so wanted to put that out there if you do enjoy this type of format. So yeah, please gather your questions that came up during this, and send them over in an email, and I will gather all of them and let you all know when I will and how I will respond to them. That's it. Thank you for listening, and see you soon.